In 1928, Americans elected Herbert Hoover to the presidency. Hoover continued the hands-off government policies of President Warren G. Harding and Calvin Coolidge. By 1930, with the economy crashing, America turned to Hoover for help. How Herbert Hoover would respond would come to define his presidency. Orphaned at a young age, Herbert Hoover's life was a rags to riches story. He attended Stanford University, and he became a self-made millionaire as a mining engineer. As a result, Hoover's beliefs centered around rugged individualism. This is the idea that everyone should succeed through their own efforts without the aid of others. Herbert Hoover served as Secretary of Commerce under Presidents Harding and Coolidge. He was a vocal proponent of their pro-business, small government policies. He won the Republican nomination in 1928 under the premise that he would continue their policies.
When the Depression hit, Hoover believed the economy would fix itself. He stressed that Americans should remain optimistic while government maintains a limited role. He opposed all forms of direct relief, or federal welfare, to aid citizens. He thought government should foster cooperation between businesses and people. Hoover believed that government shouldn't force businesses to do this, but they must do it on their own. This is a philosophy known as volunteerism, and centered on Hoover's response to the Great Depression. It's the idea that businesses and people would do what was right for the economy on their own. Hoover called together business, banking, and labor leaders to talk. He asked businesses voluntarily not to fire workers, or to cut wages. He also asked labor leaders not to strike. He concentrated government efforts to provide resources to charities, so these charities could provide relief to the needy. While this helped some, charities were overwhelmed and ran out of resources quickly.
But as the Depression worsened and Americans suffered, President Hoover just seemed to be out of touch with what the people needed. He didn't quite get the severity of the Depression.
Our country has cause for gratitude to the Almighty. We have been widely blessed with abundant harvests. We have been spared from pestilence and from calamities. Our institutions have served the people. Knowledge is multiplied and our lives are enriched with its application. Education has advanced. The health of our people has increased. We have dwelt in peace with all men. The measure of passing adversity which has come upon us should deepen the spiritual life of the people, quicken their sympathy, the spirit of self-sacrifice for others, and strengthen their courage.
By 1930, the economy was in ruins and anger in America was aimed at Hoover. Americans felt the president wasn't leading the country in a time of crisis. Desperate for help, many felt the government had failed those in need. Hoover was seen by Americans as a cold and heartless man of privilege. As the Depression worsened, frustration boiled over into anger. Americans blamed Hoover for their troubles and for worsening the Depression by not acting. Angry farmers, for example, demonstrated their frustration in numerous ways. Some burnt their crops or poured their milk into sewers instead of selling it at a loss. This especially hurt since starvation was rampant across the country. Others stopped working their lands or blocked roads and used force to prevent foreclosures of their property. Symbols of the Depression were everywhere around America, and they were named after Hoover. The homeless in American cities, who lived in shantytowns, named them Hoovervilles. When they wrapped themselves in newspapers to keep warm during the night, they were called Hoover blankets. And if you were broke with no money in your pockets, you would turn your pockets inside out to show they were empty and fly your Hoover flag.
As things continued to get worse during the Depression, Hoover was forced to abandon his policy of volunteerism. And Hoover began to provide some direct relief, but it was too little, too late. Hoover's first attempt was Boulder Dam. Hoover authorized the construction of Boulder Dam on the Colorado River. It was a public works project that created thousands of jobs, electrical power, and water supply for the region. In 1947, to commemorate his efforts in getting the dam built, the dam was renamed Hoover Dam. Hoover Dam provides the energy that fuels Las Vegas today. Next is the Federal Home Loan Bank Act. This law lowered mortgage rates and let farmers refinance their loans. It helped keep Americans in their homes. And finally, the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. This bailout provided $2 billion for banks and businesses to keep them afloat.
And then, in 1932, came the final straw of the Hoover presidency. It was the March of the Bonus Army. In 1932, 20,000 World War I veterans, unemployed, hungry, and desperate, march on Washington, D.C. They wanted Congress to pay them their World War I bonuses now, not in 1945, when it was due. Their argument was that they needed the money now to survive in the midst of the Depression, and it wouldn't do them any good in 1945. When Congress denied the Bonus Army was ordered to leave. The marchers had come with their families and set up a shantytown within view of the Capitol. Most of the marchers left D.C., but around 2,000 remained with their families, and they were mad. When they refused to leave, President Hoover ordered the U.S. Army to remove the marchers by force. The marchers were gassed, and the Army fired shots into the crowd. They set their camp on fire and burned it down. In the chaos of it all, a baby died, and many veterans were injured. The American public was outraged and blamed Herbert Hoover for firing on Army veterans. Herbert Hoover's steadfast belief in rugged individualism and volunteerism led him to become one of the most unpopular presidents in American history. Ultimately, Hoover's legacy as president is one of failure to act, and he is blamed for worsening the Depression with his inaction. Ultimately, it is Hoover's inaction during the Depression that leads the American people to demand more from their government, and Hoover's successor will more than happily oblige the American people.
The President began this campaign with the same attitude with which he has approached so many of the serious problems of the past 3 years. He sought to create the impression that there was no campaign on at all, just as he had sought to create the impression that all was well with the United States and that there was no depression.